views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Black Lives Matter has inspired a dialogue about race relations, both globally and nationally, and on personal levels as well. There's an undercurrent of ongoing considerations about who has advantages and disadvantages because of their race. For me, to be perfectly honest, it's inspired a new look at my own whiteness and how my life track might differ from others who live even right next door to me simply because of our race. It is a complex and at times personal dialogue that we will undertake this evening. We've got three superb guests on the panel who can help us navigate through personal, Bronx-wide, and historical discussions of these rarely talked about issues. So let me introduce our guests. We will get started with somebody who calls herself the conflict closer. She's a best-selling award-winning author, my friend and, in fact, neighbor, Lynne Maureen Hurdle. Lynne, nice to have you with us on BronxTalk.
Great to be here, as always.
And from one of my favorite organizations in the Bronx, they do just incredible work. Let's say good evening to the Assistant Program Coordinator of Youth Services at the Mosholu Montefiore Community Center, Shonté Armstrong. Shonté, nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
A longtime friend and colleague. I can't tell you how many times we've discussed these and other issues about what's going on in the Bronx. He's a professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University, founder and director of the Bronx African American History Project. Also, and this is important because we're going to talk about it during the program, he teaches a course called Affirmative Action and the American Dream. My friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Naison. Dr. Naison, nice to have you with us, sir.
It's great to be here, and I'm very interested in seeing where this discussion goes.
Well, we'll all find out because in a way, it's uncharted territory. I've never had a discussion like that. Let's start with my friend and neighbor and somebody I have seen in the elevator more often than I can count, Lynne Maureen Hurdle. Lynne, you and I had a pre-show discussion about our relative backgrounds, the fact that we live in the same Bronx building, we raised our children here, and yet we're aware that we actually have, maybe for want of a better term, parallel lives. Talk to me about your background. I'll be open and talk about my own background, and maybe we can come to some understanding, which is so sorely needed in this very fraught society right now.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So I think we talked about the fact that my parents faced a choice that is still faced today by the communities of color. And so they moved, when I was 7, they moved my sister and I out of the South Bronx, which was really African-American, Latinx, Hispanic. That was the neighborhood. And they moved us up here to the Bronx where we are now.
And I will say that's Van Cortlandt Village is where we live.
Right.
And really a very healthy, straight middle class, lower middle neighborhood, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hate to characterize things, but that's probably accurate.
That's right. And at the time, it was predominantly white. And so that changed our lives significantly. They did it because they knew that the education system here was better than where we were. And they kept trying to find things closer, because we used to take the subway every morning and get up really early and try to get to schools that had better options for us. And that did not happen. And so we ended up here. And it was difficult for me. I didn't have anybody who looked like me. I didn't have anybody who really understood that when I went back to the South Bronx to visit my aunts and uncles and grandmothers and cousins, that I lived a really different life there because people understood what it meant to be Black. And so it changed me. There's no question that it impacted me.
Let's be honest. Look, I'm one of the white people, and my family was one of the, no question about it, one of the white families. And I know growing up in this building, I still live where I grew up. Growing up in this building, we were all white, predominantly Jewish.
Yep.
And we all, as kids, we went to Hebrew school together. We went to the local public school together. What was it difficult? Did you feel a sting of open racism? We're generally friendly, but you never know when you get in that elevator who you're with.
Yeah. At the time, first of all, there was a lot happening in the neighborhood. I was a victim of racial attack. I escaped it because I was on the bus, and the bus driver was smart enough to close the doors. But there was a lot of that, running home for my life when there was something happening in the neighborhood, race-related. People, for the most part, were nice, but it was really clear that they didn't really see me as in their friend group. It was really very different. I was kept out of a Girl Scout troop here. My mom was trying not to travel to the South Bronx back and forth, and she was told the troop was full. And fortunately, someone said to her, "No, it's not." But it was just very difficult not to have someone who really understood what we were going through to talk to.
You and I have been friendly, with your family. We, get along just fine.
Yes.
So one final question, and then we're going to get to our other guests. How did that change you? Did it change your perspective? Did you have resentment, even of me, even though we're very friendly, and say, well, you know what? He doesn't have to go through that, or his kids don't have to deal with that. Yeah. But you had something that would be seen as life-changing and traumatic for anybody. Yeah. And it's unfortunately probably more common than anybody would like to admit.
Yeah, I think at the time that I was growing up, I really couldn't put my finger on it, but I did know that I just was not a part of things. Wow. For instance, the point where people have crushes on each other. Nobody's crushing on me. I had nobody to crush on. It was just very difficult to be in that situation and know that not only did I not have friends who really understood, but as far as romantic interests, that was just not going to happen for me.
Yeah, it is startling. And, in a way, what's startling is, as well as we know each other, this dialogue has never happened. So I'm glad, you never told me this story. And, it's something that you just understand as a course of life. And this is, you understood it, frankly, better than I did. Let's bring in Shonté Armstrong. Shonté, what are the kids saying? You work with teens and young adults. Do they get along? Are they tired of this dialogue? You know what? Our parents are all stupid. The older generation, they can't figure it out. We've inherited a world that doesn't understand some basic things. I see a lot of young people, and I think my sense is they seem to accept differences in each other, whether it be sexual orientation or racial differences, better than maybe the generation that Lynne and I grew up in.
You're 100% correct. Actually.
Oh, okay.
So yes, right now we have what's called the Mmcc Youth Coalition, and so I work predominantly with teens. The coalition is made up of our older youth, the 18 to 24-year-olds in particular. We received a grant from UJA, from United Jewish Appeals, to work on a racial equity project. And in the 14 years that I've been working strictly with teens, I have to say that this year in particular, teens are different now. They're very different. They are 100% more open to everything.
And to each other. I want to just interject that. They're more open to each other and understanding and even having dialogues about things that Lynne and I never talked about till tonight.
Oh, absolutely. They're very accepting of differences. They are very accepting and very welcoming of that. And what has happened now is, over the last year or so, with everything, going on in the media and all the different racial tension issues that have been happening, things that they used to feel they were so far removed from, they now are starting to understand and see the significance of what their parents are saying, what the older generation is saying. So it's been very interesting. They're tired of having the conversation, but more so because they don't feel that this should not even be happening. That's where they are, and now it's just they're asking questions that I don't think any of us thought to ask growing up.
Because it's been put right in their face. To me, it's the quote unquote genius of the Black Lives Matter movement. And people are even debating the phrase Black Lives Matter, but they understand maybe now we're going to make it. I mean, this is the most hopeful thing I've heard in a very long time. Listen, Martin Luther King made it very clear, and we're going to get some historical perspective from Dr. Naison in a moment. He made it very clear that in order to empower, that we can talk about the morality all we want, but in order to empower, it's got to be a look at poverty and a look at addressing the economic disparities. And so this, and I've got the information on it, the future of this grant, you're going to be focusing on financial empowerment, entrepreneurship, and all those kinds of things. Do you see it? And then Dr. Naison is going to give us the bottom line on this kind of thing. Do you see it as this is really what we've got to do? And the kids understand, you know what? Talk is cheap. Yeah, we can put our arms around each other, but unless my family gets and gets opportunity, it's all out the window.
I do believe that it starts there, because the part of the problem is the disparities in economics for people of color versus Caucasian. There's a very big difference there. And what happens now is, although we're focusing on that, we have to be able to have real conversation. I think even in school, you can't have real conversation and address what's really going on to make everything real for them. Mm-hmm. They have to be able to connect it to what's going on now. We cannot keep on brushing, difficult conversations under the rug. This generation, they need the conversation. They want the answers. They want the information. And in order to create those changes, they have to understand what's behind it. They have to understand where it started from to make it make sense now, and to see why things have not changed. Right. And what's needed to impact change. And
I've made the commitment to you that maybe one of our holiday shows is going to be with those teens. We're going to bring them in and give them a chance to talk instead of having us talk about it. There are many, many issues that we'll get to. Dr. Naison, you study this. You live a lot of your life around these dialogues. So without even asking you a question, what have you heard that resonates for you and that you want to apply so that we can understand what all this means?
The issue that you are addressing here is one I had to confront 55 years ago when I fell in love with a Black woman, was kicked out of my family and adopted by hers. And then when I was hired by Fordham to teach in the Institute of Afro-American Studies in 1970, and I found myself the only white scholar in a team of Black scholars. I've had to interrogate my whiteness for a very, very long time. One of the things I realized was that my Black colleagues, my Black friends, were living under a series of stresses that were far greater than I ever experienced. And this goes on to this day.
We heard that from Lynne Hurdle just a moment ago.
I wrote an article called Dying While Black, because in my early 60s, my Black friends and colleagues were going to funerals of other Black professionals. And I didn't have that experience until my mid-70s. So, there are these huge disparities in experience that people have to talk about.
So ironically, what you just told us is you felt as isolated as Lynne Maureen Hurdle did in her neighborhood. did you feel a resentment of others making an assumption that because you were white, you had certain advantages that they
No,
didn't have?
I
You
felt
did
no
not.
resentment whatsoever because I understood I had a role there to listen and to take what I was learning and present it to a much larger audience. There is no comparison between being the only white person in an almost all black milieu to being the only black person in an all white milieu, because the power disparities when you're black in that situation are far greater. Even though I might have felt isolated, the minute I left, the minute I walked on the sidewalk, the minute I stepped in my car, the minute I went into a restaurant, I was the recipient in a predominantly white society of a level of acceptance and understanding my black colleagues could never count on. They couldn't count on being treated well by police if they were stopped in their car.
And listen to what
on courteous service.
Yeah, what we heard from Lynne, that she was chased down the street. It's abhorrent. I mean, I can't even imagine it.
It's much
insane.
more than being. It's not the being chased down the street. It's the everyday. It's the aversive reactions.
My black friends are acknowledging absolutely that it's a state. It's a state of mind. It's something you're always aware of.
Day. Not knowing whether somebody is going to insult you, misunderstand you.
I want to ask you one thing.
Power.
I want to ask you one thing, which Lynne talked about, that the origin of her family deciding to move was because of the quality of schools. Now, we know that New York City, and it's been well documented, has the most segregated school system in the country, which is striking given our diversity. How do you see, Dr. Naison, how do you see schools right now? Are we getting better? When you hear someone like Shonté talking about how kids are reacting, maybe they're picking up something in school, and they're less maybe territorial. I don't know. What's your thought? Because I know you're an educator and you believe in the right kind of education.
I mean, there are a lot of things we're doing in schools better than we did then, and there are a lot of things we're doing worse. We don't have the sports and music and arts programs that our schools once had. We're more sensitive to diversity of all kinds, and that's good. But if our kids, all they do is go to class and absorb information and don't have a chance to express themselves creatively, then we're not inspiring.
Yeah, we're not getting anywhere. And right now, of course, kids have had such a difficult time with the pandemic and everything else. One of the other things that, and I'm using myself, being totally frank and honest and personal about it, one of the things that shocked me, but we're going to go to Lynne, and Shonté can have a little perspective on that, was the whole notion that many black people said, I'm not taking the vaccination because they didn't trust the health institutions. And I was like, wait a minute, it's out there. But I have black friends who I talk to, and they say, I ain't going to get it. And I don't believe it. And that, and I've covered health disparities on this program a number of times. I am shocked, frankly, that the mistrust is so deep that they would even, what I think is, take a chance with their health. Lynne, will let you weigh in, and Shonté will each get a chance at that, because I know you see it. If I can be personal, are you vaccinated? I think you are.
I am, but I was not going to be, especially when we started talking about how fast it was coming out. We have a history of being experimented on, and that goes beyond Tuskegee. I mean, people who even know about Tuskegee, okay, they can say that, but there's books about us being experimented on. And so we are not going to be the first ones running for a vaccine, particularly one that we heard was going to take years, and now suddenly
Here it is. And ultimately, you were personally convinced that it was the right thing to do.
I had to. I have I have to travel for my business. And so I had to do that. But I also just felt like I had just been sheltered in too long. I had to take the chance and do that for myself.
That is it's startling, and to me, it shows how deep this systemic racism goes. And when we talk about parallel lives, I mean, those kinds of things never occurred to me. Shonté, you wanted to weigh in on that a similar thing?
Lynne said almost exactly what I was going to say. Unfortunately, history has not worked in the favor of Black people when it comes to experimental drugs, experiments in general. I was actually very adamant that I would not get vaccinated.
Wow.
And I only did it because my mother is elderly and has some compromised health issues. So I did it because they were making her get it. And I felt like I couldn't let them give my mother something that I would not
Wow.
get. That is the only reason why I did it.
So when you hear, and we'll ask each of you to comment further, when you hear somebody, like you'll see somebody on TV or whatever, a Black person who says, just like you folks have articulated, I'm not taking it. Do you say in your mind, I understand, okay? Or do you say in your mind, I understand, but maybe you ought to do it because it'll keep you, your family, or like what this is for you, Shonté, and we'll let Lynne weigh in on that. What do you think?
It always starts with I understand, because if you've been there, you know it, you're just like, I get it. I think in the Black community, we lost a lot of people. Many of us saw people close to us get, deathly ill, pass away. So, it's a real thing. It was never a question of, you hear people say this is not real. So we knew it was real. So when I do hear people say that, I definitely understand. But I do try to convince them like, hey, we're losing people. The numbers are not in our favor. So, it's just something to consider. But I have to respect people's stance on not doing it.
You, I will tell you, both have offered me further understanding tonight, because I'm pretty strong that people should be vaccinated, but I've learned something. Dr. Naison, I want to just talk about the course you teach, Affirmative Action, the American Dream. You do a lot of work on literally the systemic racism. I think about policing. We talked about education. There are economic structures and legal structures I know you talk about. So why don't you offer some of that so that we can put that in here?
This issue of health disparities. One of the first reverse discrimination case that the Supreme Court heard was the Bakke decision, 1978. University of California, Davis Medical School decided that they would offer 16 out of 100 spots in each year's medical school entering class to students from underrepresented groups, Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Native American. And their rationale for doing it was twofold: to respond to societal discrimination, which historically had put those groups at a great disadvantage, and also to improve medical service in minority communities. The Supreme Court of the United States rejected both of those rationales and rejected the admission system. And they basically argued that increasing the number of minority doctors would not improve medical service in minority communities.
Wow. That is startling.
1978. And as a result of that, this very powerful effort to integrate the medical profession, which could have undermined some of the suspicions we're talking about, was undermined by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Wow. So this really, I mean, we could extrapolate that to any number of issues. We're almost out of time. This is a dialogue that, of course, needs to go on in depth for a very long time. But let's go around the room and ask each of you. We'll go in the same order. So, Lynne, you'll start. What do you see as solutions? I know you work at closing conflicts, and that's a good start. But at addressing this monumental problem that has existed for hundreds of years here in the United States of America.
Well, the first thing, and I'm working on addressing it myself, is that white people really actually have to understand and know. They got to educate themselves. Because we can have a conversation all day long, and they don't understand why we won't get vaccinated, or they don't understand the history around it because they don't understand our history. Yes. So I work with white people. I teach a group called On the Matter of Race, which is for white people who really want to learn about racism and actually take some action. And they have started to learn some of these things so that it's not a big surprise, at least when we have the conversations.
Lynne, I've discussed that this has been a learning experience for me. And when you look at these issues, like you look at something like women's empowerment, the women are not going to be able to be empowered like they ought to be until the boys or the men get the idea. And so it's the same thing you're saying. White people have got to, I don't want to use the word awaken because that starts a whole other political dialogue. Right. Shonté, to me, you're already doing what we ought to be doing, and that's empowering our young people to understand better and get better opportunities. But do you want to summarize that? And then we'll give Dr. Naison about a minute also to summarize.
Sure. I think, again, it goes back to opening the floor for the conversation. Mm-hmm. I think we have to get to a place where people are willing to have real conversation and exposing themselves. We have to be willing to take a deeper dive into the conversation. But I think for Black people, it's more of needing white people to stop expecting Black people to get themselves out of this situation.
Because it's got to be a team effort. Yeah.
Correct. They didn't put themselves in a situation, and therefore they can't just get out of it. And they're also not the people that's in control most of the time. So we have to start there. And that's why getting young people to get a voice and getting them to understand history and putting them in seats where they can affect change and be a part of the broader conversation. That's where we started.
I want to bring Dr. Naison in. You deal with this every single day in your classrooms and in your daily life. Give us about 60 seconds.
I'm trying to change the way history is taught at Fordham and around the country. And one of the things I did in my affirmative action class in the second week, I played a video about the Tulsa massacre, the destruction of Black Wall Street, to point out how throughout much of American history, there was nothing more threatening than Black success. And we have to deal with that history and its continuing impact on wealth disparities, health disparities, and also differences in how we view American society. And the more we understand that, the more likely we are to come together to find solutions.
Some solutions. Listen, this is, as I said, a vital dialogue, and we need to have it. And we've had it here tonight for a simple half hour, but if we can extend it in any format, in any forum, I'd be happy to participate. Thank you, Dr. Mark Naison. Continued great work over there at Fordham. Thank you, Shonté Armstrong. Continued great work at one of my favorite places in the Bronx, the Mosholu Montefiore Community Center. And Lynne Maureen Hurdle, Closing Conflicts. You can find her at LynneMaureenHurdle.com. Folks, thank you so much for joining us in this very important dialogue. The next 2 weeks, we're going to be doing some holiday shows. You're going to see some of the best of, and we're going to do some fun things. So happy holidays, I guess it's coming. And we'll see you all every week. Good night.